Hello, and welcome to our 10th session of the Tech and Innovation Center series, part of the Local Infrastructure Hub. As you join the Zoom and get settled in, I welcome you to share your name, role, and organization in the chat. My name is Tina Walla, and I'm the Chief Partnerships Officer for U.S. Digital Response, which is a nonpartisan nonprofit that provides pro bono technology support to governments. This series is part of the Local Infrastructure Hub, which aims to help America's towns and cities take full advantage of the federal infrastructure funding by helping to create competitive and winning bids that deliver real results for residents. This session today is brought to you by Cornell Tech and U.S. Digital Response and is supported by our funders Bloomberg Philanthropies, Ballmer Group, Emerson Collective, Ford Foundation, and Kresge Foundation. Now, as a refresher, or for those of you who are joining us for the first time, I'd love to share with you some of the values that guide the Tech and Innovation Center series. We aim to inspire local government leaders, like y'all, about the integration of technology that will improve city infrastructure today and for the years to come. 4 key values guide our series, as shown on this slide. First, we're driven by shared goals. We do not believe in technology for technology's sake. Second, we want to design for people. Technology processes and products have to reflect the diverse needs and desires of groups and individuals. We are not all the same. Third, we believe in approaching this work with a commitment to resourcing this work. We appreciate that there's a lot of federal funding out there right now, but we want to think about long-term sustainability, recognizing that that's what's top of mind for all of you in your communities. And this includes planning for workforce, policies, and regulations. And last, but certainly not least, we want to build for trust. Tech and innovation should deliver solutions that are transparent, secure, available, reliable, durable, and mindful of privacy considerations. Now, onto today's topic. Today, we're going to hear about a really interesting city and university collaboration on digital twins, which combine data visualization, simulation, and machine learning to help governments make informed decisions about infrastructure and about their operations. This is top of mind for us at the Tech and Innovation Center because we want to help all of you prepare for FEMA's Building Resilient Communities and Infrastructure program, which is gearing up to release another NOFO this fall. To help educate us, I'm going to invite my partner, Anthony Townsend from Cornell Tech, to ground us in some context about today's topic and discussion. Anthony, over to you.
Thank you, Tina. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. So let's start with trying to demystify this term digital twins. There's a lot of different definitions floating around out there, both on the industry side and the public sector. I think this one from IBM is a good starting point because it really captures all the pieces that are in play, as well as what the purpose and the value of a digital twin is. And they describe it as a virtual representation of an object or system that spans its life cycle. So it's created before the physical thing is actually built, and it remains even after it's dismantled or disposed of. It's updated from real-time data, so it's constantly being recalibrated, and it uses simulation, machine learning, and reasoning. So what we think of as AI to help decision-making, and help is a really important piece of that. Digital twins don't make decisions on their own. They're not automated or autonomous, although they may have some automated or autonomous elements. They're really the latest in a long line of decision support systems that we've used in government for decades. So next slide, please. I want to just walk through, where digital twins have emerged from and why they're available and important for cities now. They really got their origins in industrial process engineering and manufacturing. Companies like GE have been developing digital twins of very sophisticated machines like aircraft engines for about a decade now. And that allows them to design and improve and test completely in silico without ever having to assemble a prototype device. They can essentially prototype in this computer simulation. Digital twins are also used in large complex facilities like refineries and other kinds of industrial plants. With recent advances in computing and better data, digital twin approaches are now scaling up to entire buildings and even entire cities, and allowing us to do all of these things, to model, to calibrate those models in real time, and then make better decisions based on the results of those models. So I just want to walk through quickly how that goes in practice. Next slide, please. And you can really think of it as a kind of a 4-step flow. The first step begins in the real world, where you have decision makers defining problems and the questions to be answered. So, for instance, in cities, modeling stormwater systems, which have been under tremendous stress. We need to prioritize, the limited funds we have to invest in improving them under these new climate stresses. That could be one example of a starting point for digital twin development. Next slide, please. From there, we hand it off to modelers who identify what are the assets and the processes that need to be replicated in this digital twin environment. And one question that came up as we were planning this session is, where does AI come into play in digital twins? Because it is possible to build digital twins with AI, without AI, but AI is helping to supercharge digital twins in many ways. And here, AI can play a key role in allowing us to extract data from the data that we already have. Photographs, other kinds of documents and surveys that cities might already have on hand, quickly digitize those and create those digital virtual representations of our real physical city. Next slide, please. Inside the digital twin, we'll have computer code that is doing analyses, creating metrics at different levels of aggregation that can be useful, and also simulating processes in the physical world to make predictions. And where AI comes into play is to really improve and expand the range of things that we can predict inside a digital twin. The next step. And then we come to the end where the digital twin delivers this information to decision makers, public officials, other stakeholders as well. AI can play a role here making recommendations based on past experience or based on other results of the model. And then to close the cycle, AI can even observe what happens after public officials make decisions and the outcomes that produces in the real world. So this is really seen as a loop where the system is constantly improving its representation of the physical world and constantly learning from the cause and effect of the decisions that it supports. Next. So why are we even talking about this right now? The context for this discussion is that FEMA's BRIC, Building Resilient Communities and Infrastructure program, is gearing up for another round this year. This is a program that launched 3 years ago in 2020. Last year, awarded $4.6 billion in discretionary grants. And I think FEMA has been taking the summer to sort of step back and assess the experience of the last 3 years so far. They did an extensive outreach effort over the summer, which wrapped up in August 2023. And we expect that they're going to be raising the bar in terms of the kinds of technology and innovation ideas when the program relaunches this fall. And we see digital twins as a really great opportunity for cities to rise to that challenge. There are many, many uses of this approach in urban resilience, emergency response, operations and planning. We're going to hear about that today from Austin. Infrastructure monitoring and maintenance, environmental monitoring, stormwater management, as I mentioned, transportation management, planning, community engagement, and public health preparedness. And this is just a partial list. There are many other applications. So it's an important technology and innovation space to watch, and we're excited to learn more from the folks from Austin who are putting this into practice. Tina, back over to you.
Great. Thanks, Anthony. And I don't know about everybody else in the audience, but I My knowledge on digital twins just skyrocketed just from that initial overview from Anthony. So really appreciate it. With all of that in mind, I'm excited to welcome our speakers. So joining us from Austin, Texas, are Charles Perma, the Strategic Partnerships Manager with the City of Austin's Innovation Office. While I'm introducing the speakers, you'll see this poll question pop up. We want you to share with us, how familiar are you with the concept of a digital twin? You got a sense of how familiar I am. So while you're answering that, I'll introduce our other two speakers. So joining Charles are Robert Turner, the General Manager of Austin's Combined Transportation, Emergency, and Communication Center, and Mark Couder, Climate Resilience and Adaptation Manager from the City of Austin's Office of Resilience. So welcome, gentlemen. This is a great poll result. Take a look, everyone. You are in good company. And so with these poll results in mind, 57% of you said the term of digital twins is completely new to you. As we shift into asking our speakers questions, do not be shy about questions you have. Drop them in the chat. Anthony's going to be keeping an eye on questions, as am I. And we'll try to make sure that we're making lots of space to get your questions answered in today's session, since this is a valuable sort of educational opportunity for all of us. So Charles, I want to come to you first. The projects we're going to talk about today were both done in partnership with researchers at the University of Texas. Can you tell us a bit about the partnership and why Austin reached out to the university?
Yes, and we reached out for very similar types of projects and purposes and reasons as you've been talking about back in 2017, 2018. The CIO of the city of Austin asked me to make some partnerships with some local institutions and organizations. And one of the first that we thought about, of course, was the University of Texas. They're a fantastic research institution. They also have the Advanced Computing Center there, which has the largest and fastest supercomputer in an academic institution. And so it was kind of natural to reach out to them first. And some of our projects that came from several different departments were really focused on how might we use AI, machine learning, and digital twinning, because we did not really have the experience and the skill set in the city. So reached out to them. We did a workshop in 2018. We brought together about 50 folks from the city, from various departments, about 50 researchers, and put together some project scopes on some projects. Several of them weren't really strictly digital twin projects, but they were AI and machine learning types of projects. The UT funded them with about $1.2 million. We had projects that dealt with homelessness, emergency response, among others. And it was such a successful successful workshop that we looked at how might we be able to partner more effectively and efficiently. So when the city then goes to UT for a project, at that time it was taking the city 6 to 8 months, if we were lucky, to get a project in place, because there was no standardized way of contracting with UT for research projects. So we spent about the next year really normalizing and standardizing all of our processes, legal processes, purchasing processes across both of the organizations, and put together an interlocal agreement that was funded by, or that was approved by City Council in August or October of August of 2020, and then the interlocal agreement went in place in October of 2020. And that provides the legal and administrative framework to do these types of projects. So now all the terms and conditions are standardized. Things like IP data sharing are already figured out, and we also do not have to go back to council for these projects. So we thought it was a perfect partnership. Many of our projects have an IT or tech and an infrastructure and resilience angle to them. So UT's been fantastic partners. We're now able to get a project up and running in a matter of weeks, when it, again, used to take six to 8 months, and been able to really, push the envelope forward in what the city is now able to explore when it comes to these types of technologies.
That's great. And Charles, I know you shared a couple slides here on the partnership itself. Anything else you want to speak to on this or the other slides you shared? Just to, again,
Yeah.
orient folks from communities like Pittsburgh, Minneapolis, Westerville, just to get their head around the collaboration.
Sure. And we do have like a four-step process and a lot of documentation that goes along with it. So if anyone is interested in our process, how we put this together, how we manage it and run it, just please reach out to me. I'm happy to share whatever I have. If you're interested in putting a similar type of partnership in place, I actually partnered with the city of San Antonio to put together almost an exact type of agreement with UT in San Antonio. Also talked to Boston, New York, Boise, a few other cities that are interested in doing this. I would say that if you want to maybe go to slide, not the next one, but the next one, just to give people an idea of the projects. So here on this slide, these are all the different schools and colleges at UT, as well as all the different city departments. Since October of 2020, we've added 34 joint projects into our portfolio, about 5.3 million. We have, I think, 6 projects that are currently in the process of getting signed off on right now. The ILA is a 5-year agreement, and it enables us to spend up to $10 million before we have to go back to council to get any further authority to spend additional funds. And the projects are really can be all over the place, from natural sciences to community engagement to emergency response, IT types of projects. Really, if it's research and there's a municipal purpose, and the city has the funds to allocate towards these projects, then we've tried to make it as open and flexible for any department or any city staff at any level to work with UT.
That's fantastic. And I want to shift over to Robert now, but Charles, I may come back to you, and I'm going to, again, keep my eye on the chat, but if folks have questions about Charles's role, his role is a strategic partnerships manager, Charles, I might invite you to speak to that a bit. But Robert, let me come to you next. So I don't often try to do this, but we're going to do this. We're going to travel back in time a little bit to the pandemic. It might not be what we want to do, but that's when your team created a digital twin of the interior of Austin's Combined Transportation Emergency and Communication Center. Can you tell us about this facility? What is it? What was the problem that your team was trying to solve at the time?
Thanks, Tina. It's great to be here. I'm very excited about this partnership and to be able to kind of explain the huge benefits that we get. So Austin, 20-something years ago, partnered with our local transportation authority, Capital Metro, the county, Travis County, and the Austin district of the Texas Department of Transportation, or TxDOT. And we established a facility that has 3 main purposes. So we do transportation management, we do emergency management, and then we do 911 or emergency call handling and dispatch. So during the pandemic, one of the things that we're really concerned about is today, in the way technology works, working from home to answer and dispatch 911 calls is not an option. There's security reasons, there's resiliency reasons, there's just reasons of collaboration and coordination that just make working from home not feasible for emergency call handling and dispatch. So what our agencies are worried about, and we've got 4 of them that are on our operations floor, and I'll show you a photo of that in just a second. We've got about 100 that if they get an outbreak of, and obviously COVID comes to mind, but really any airborne disease, and we got a bunch of people that are out sick, it does 2 things. 1, it makes the other folks have to work extra hours. So if you don't, it's hard on them. And 2, it is going to increase the wait times for people's emergency calls to be handled. So what we wanted to do is find a way to really do an assessment of our air handling and see if we could make some improvements to what we're currently doing, either in the distribution, the management of those systems, or in just overall filtration of this air. We wanted to make sure and find out if there's anything that we could be doing. So we reached, if you could maybe go to the next slide so we can kind of see the photo so people can have an idea of what we're looking at. So we reached out, I reached out to Charles and then to the University of Texas, and through their School of Architecture and their School of Engineering, we were able to engage a team that was able to come in and help build, build the digital twin model of the operations floor. And if you could skip maybe to the slide 7, so we'll go 2 slides ahead. And we can kind of look. So this is the digital twin that was created. So yeah, it looks like a fuzzy photograph, but here's the cool thing about this. This is digital information. Now we can go in and make some changes digitally and see if that has it going to improve the air handling, if it's going to improve the dispersion rates. We can go in and also have we can try out different ideas. We can try out different fabrics. We can try out all kinds of different things, furniture layouts. It just gives us an ability to be able to make changes and see if they're going to help us really reduce the spread of airborne disease. And so that's, to me, the biggest benefit of this technology is team from UT came in, did a lot of work scanning this using light detection and ranging equipment. And now we have this tool that allows us to really try these things out. And the other cool thing about this is through this relationship, we actually implemented some of their recommendations. And so now we're going to come back and have them gather some additional data to see how well did those recommendations perform compared to, in essence, doing a before and after. So really helpful for us in 2 ways. One, lets us really get some good state-of-the-art recommendations from the university researchers, and 2, try them out and see, is there anything else that we could do to make things better?
That's super helpful. And I know I've just like scribbled a note to myself to look at LiDAR later. I don't know if I'm the only one on the call, but
so it's basically, instead of using radio waves, you use light waves, and it functions exactly the same way. That's really what happens. So instead of radar, it's LiDAR.
Excellent.
That's all.
Okay. Thank you. Good explanation. Can you tell us a little bit about how the digital twin was used? Like, why was it valuable, particularly given that use case or that problem that you shared with us?
Yeah, so we did a couple of things with it. One is, once we had the data gathered and we had the twin built, what we wanted to look at it. So we identified during the data gathering, so we kind of had 2 pieces of this. One is the digital twin, which is done with LiDAR. The second is we gathered a bunch of data about our current temperature information, airflow information in this operations floor. Again, it's about 13,000 square feet and 122 positions. And what we're able to do is, one, here's our before stuff. So we gathered a bunch of information. Here's what it looks like. Using the digital twin, we could try out different options to see, from a cost-effective perspective, how we're going to improve our airflow, improve the uniformity of our temperature throughout the room, and in a way that's not going to negatively impact the folks that are sitting on the floor answering emergency calls. And that's the real value of this, is we can make, and we can also do what if analysis. So one of the other things that we looked at is, if we make a change to the way the furniture is laid out, will that have any benefits in terms of either airflow, temperature, or in some of the cases, we're also looking at just spatial arrangement for information that these folks have to gather and use on a day-to-day basis.
Wow. And just to give folks a sense, how many folks are in that command center working on transportation management, emergency management, and 911 dispatch? Like, how many folks do you have at any given time?
I'm going to sound like an attorney when I answer this question, so no offense to the attorneys, but it depends. So agencies staff by historical call volume. So again, emergency calls, we get way more on a Friday night or a Saturday night than we do on a Sunday morning. So peak volume, when we got a lot of folks there, we could have close to 90 people working in this facility during peak times. When it's not so peak, it's probably closer to around 60, just because agencies have additional staff. Again, they're trying to make sure those calls get answered in a timely way, so they'll bring extra staff on when they know there's going to be high call volume.
Yeah, well, that's really helpful because it helps to sort of contextualize how this digital twin is helping you for those 60 to 90 folks who are really focused on operations and keeping things moving, how you're able to leverage the digital twin to sort of keep them safe and to ensure smooth and effective operations. last question for you, Robert, before I've got some questions for Mark. What plans do you have for this approach moving forward? Based on how it's worked, tell us a little bit. Can you give us a little sneak preview about what might be coming next?
So, sorry, won't be a short answer. 3 things. One, we will use this digital twin to help us with any kind of other existing modifications. One of the things that we're looking at right now is we just started a conversation with the university about potentially changing out some of the fabric in the operations floor to see, 1, will it help with sound reduction? And 2, are there any mitigations that it can do? So if you think like aircraft and whatnot, they're fabrics that are specially designed to keep the sound down and to help reduce the spread of germs. So that's one. The second thing is we're looking to establish a second facility for resiliency purposes. And we will use this digital twin technology, not the same one that we have today, but a digital twin technology to help us look at different options for spatial arrangement in the new facility. We've gathered a lot of information about how people communicate and collaborate on a day-to-day basis. That's the fundamental reason this facility was established. So we're going to use that information to help us take, some generic, if you will, floor plans, and then manipulate those to see, what's going to be the best arrangement of the furniture to ensure we get good collaboration in our second facility. And then the third piece of that really is taking, again, that conceptual model for the second facility and just playing with some of the airflow and temperature and helping us understand how that facility might behave under a people load of 50 people versus 100 people versus in different kinds of furniture layouts as well. So really lots of things that we can do. And I think, to me, the thing that's the biggest value out of all of this is, yes, you got to invest some time and some effort to get this established. But then from a long-term perspective, there's so much value and so much cost savings that we can achieve by, hey, how does this work? Got a model? Try it out. Oh, yeah, looks like it might work. Or, oh, no, that's going to be not effective at all. So really a great proving ground, if you will, to try out ideas and new thoughts.
I love that. Well, and on that very last point that Robert made, those ideas and new thoughts, I'm going to invite folks to share in the chat if there are any use cases that you've thought about for digital twins, or for those of you who, like me, were new to this topic, if there's things you're wondering about. Would this be a good use case, or would something be a good use case? Throw it in the chat. We're going to invite you to come off mute and ask our speakers directly so that this can be good use of your time and help with the work that you've got going on in your community. Now, Mark, I want you to help us. You're going to transition us outdoors. You're going to take us out of this physical space that Robert described. And I'm remembering we had a call a few weeks ago, and you described Austin as a sort of fire adapted ecosystem, I think was the phrase you used. Can you share with us, what does that mean? And what are the specific challenges that creates?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. So most people don't know that Austin gets wildfires. They mostly think of the West Coast and other parts of the United States. But our landscape, our vegetation, our wildlife is really based on annual fires. If you think of it this way, West Austin is very hilly, lots of mansions, higher income. But East Austin is fairly flat, a lot of grassland with an occasional tree. But also we're having this situation of suburbanization of poverty intersecting with the rural poor as gentrification pushes more people to the east. So fire becomes sort of a big topic to think about because it's usually on the fringes, but that's where people are moving. We get a big wildfire once every 10 years. It makes a lot of news. The plane come in, the governor shows up. But what people don't think about is that we get a grass fire almost every day. And they last a couple hours, they hit a road and then they go out. They don't really make the news. But they're in locations with higher rates of asthma and COPD. So you have this intersection of grass fire, bad air quality, and people with asthma in an area of higher poverty. It doesn't really mix well.
Interesting. I'm sort of stunned at that daily occurrence that you just described. So If I recall correctly, there was the potential to take advantage of, I think it was the fire department's drone fleet. Is that right? Tell us a little bit about sort of how you sort of connected dots based on this fire adapted ecosystem
Yeah,
to engage
absolutely.
in the city.
Jamie, I don't know if you could pull up slides. I can show you. Maybe better with graphics. Yeah, thank you. So as I mentioned, the east side of Austin has fallow agriculture, has a lot of land the city owns, but most of it is just isn't maintained. So if a truck comes by with chains, or somebody flicks a cigarette, or a lightning strike, we'll get a grass fire. And as I said, they're really fast. They kind of last a couple hours, but they create a lot of smoke. Next slide. So we top left, we start to look at what are the asthma rates and COPD, which is a lung disease, and what is the likelihood of a grass fire. And we saw this as overlap. I'm not saying that the one causes the other, but there's definitely an overlap in the landscape. And I was talking to the fire department, and they were like, hey, we have drones. I'm like, really? So we were thinking, you know what? Whenever somebody calls 911 for a grass fire, we could triangulate the location and then have the fire department go out, fly a drone around the perimeter of it to put it on a map, and then automatically calculate wind speed and wind direction to know where it's going. And thinking about asthma and thinking about the community, we were like, this is a great way to warn schools or low-income housing or even senior centers, is be like, hey, if there's somebody there with asthma or some breathing problems, take them indoors and make sure they're safe. We have a similar things for flooding on the bottom left, where we have sensors in creeks, and when there's a flood, it automatically tells us which roads are washed over. We thought, hey, this would be great to have a tool to be like, hey, this is where the grass fire is, and this is where it is sort of in the area, so please be careful. So we sort of thought it up, but didn't really take it any much further. And then one day we were talking to Charles and be like, would this be something that the university would be interested in? And we just sort of went with it. So next slide. What we hadn't really considered are the opportunities. We hadn't thought of this as a 3D map. We thought of this as a 2D map, very much sort of informational. But this digital twin of actually a 3D model of the city sort of brought up so many other great opportunities. All of a sudden, people could see it, they could visualize it, they could understand it. And our biggest problem is trying to communicate this information to the public. So allowing to see this in 3D allowed these people to really sort of consider, wow, this is a big impact. This is something to consider. And also, it also started to help us model like where the smoke might go, where are the communities we should be looking at, what are the communities who might be impacted, where directions it might go in, and who's out there that we should be communicating ahead of time. So this was sort of an exciting way of starting that conversation with the community, but also starting that conversation with all these faculty, all these researchers, and the fire department.
I really appreciate that point about how it helped communicate to the public. Because otherwise, like models like this might come off as, overly technical and academic, and it's really interesting from a data perspective. But what you're highlighting is no, this can be really valuable when you think about pushing information out to your residents, making sure that they're aware of the situation and scenario. And because of the three-dimensional visualization, it just brings it to life in such a clear and effective way. So really appreciate that point. Can you explain a little bit more about the digital twin prototype? So where does the data come from, and how might it be used?
That's a great question. So the data for actually creating the 3D model is, it's out there in GIS layers, it's out there on Google Earth, we have that data. But the interesting piece is, where do we get the smoke data? And that elevated the fact that our data isn't perfect. So what happens is, when there's a grass fire or there's a house fire or an apartment fire, it automatically gets uploaded into this database. But right now, it isn't differentiated between house fire, grass fire, and apartment fire. So they all just show up. So that's we had to sort of clean that data. The other thing is that people were quick to identify the fire and put it into the database, but we're really slow to go back and remove it. So it looked like fires would go on for months, and be like, well, we should probably clean that data to make sure it's actually usable and something we can actually, turn into a digital twin to make it usable. The other piece, though, is this is a partnership. It's a relationship. And the the models that the university uses are wonderful, but they're often designed for researchers and not for the public. So we have to do a little bit of back and forth or be like, well, this public doesn't have access to GIS files. They don't have access to these databases, but they do have access to Google Earth. So they could actually use Google Earth as a means to communicate that, because most people we've talked to are familiar with that platform. So how do you make it understandable to the common user, but also being really sophisticated on the back end on the research side?
Such a good example of designing for those end users while also, I mean, just the level of sophistication of how you developed this is not lost on me, or I'm sure anyone else in the audience. So it's a really great example of, again, if you think about those values of what this series is intended to do, we're designing for the people who are going to be able to act on the data. And I think this is a great example of that. Jamie, if you want to take the slides down. All right, folks, let's ask our speakers some questions. So I'm going to encourage you to drop questions in the chat. And I saw a question from Mickey in Pittsburgh. So Mickey, let me invite you, if you're in a place where you can come off mute. There you are. Let me invite you to share your question.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity. So I was wondering, Charles, what were the top 3 cybersecurity and kind of data management challenges that your team met at the start of your projects, and how did you overcome them, or at least are looking to overcome them?
I wouldn't say we've had much cybersecurity issues for any of our projects, but we do almost every project does deal with data. So at the very beginning of our conversations with UT and the legal and procurement folks and the IT group at the city, is we tried to collect all the different concerns and all the different rules and regulations and policies around data and data sharing. And we crafted language in the overall interlocal agreement or master contract to address those up front. We also worked specifically with our energy department, Austin Energy, because they have their own set of rules and regulations. So we made sure that those were taken into account as well. So we started off with just having a big general conversation across the city and with UT about just the topic of data sharing and data privacy and security. And then within there's a document that's called the work order, which is actually just kind of the contract for each individual project. So within that work order, we ask each project team to do some data identification and data classification about the data that's going to be used and shared during each project. So we asked, are you even going to be using city data at all? If so, let's classify and do a risk assessment and analysis on that data. Are there privacy security concerns, anything like that? And then that then is also then reviewed on UT side. And then we, depending on, this triage that we go through, then we add additional protections into the work order itself to make sure everybody knows, what the data are, who's authorized to use this data, how can this data be shared, who owns this data afterwards, those types of things. So we take it on. We started at the beginning to kind of do a high level an audit or assessment on what we needed to do, and then each individual project we go through a similar process to talk about the specific data sets for that project. So we try to bake it in as much as we can to the overall process. Most of the concerns are privacy concerns. If we're using citizen and resident data, that's the thing that we usually have conversations about.
Thanks, Charles. And thanks, Mickey, for the question. Next, I'm going to actually invite Anthony. Anthony, what questions are coming to mind for you?
Hi, everybody, and thanks for sharing all that fascinating work. I think my question is like maybe taking a step back and asking each of you to comment on the challenge of doing what I tried to do at the beginning of the session, which is to explain to your colleagues, decision makers, you may need their green light to go ahead with some of these projects. The public, what digital twins are, what they do, why it's valuable, and also maybe if I could ask you to speculate on some of the changes in how government does its work that you might see coming as we embrace more of these kinds of solutions.
That's a great question. I'm eager to hear from all three speakers, given this is something new for city government. And so you really want to get folks comfortable, but also appreciate the power of what digital twins can bring. Charles, you want to get us started?
Yeah, I don't get down in the nuts and bolts of these projects, but I think, generally doing as much showing and less telling that you can. So any kind of visuals, any kind of demonstrations are very helpful. Getting people brought in very early to the process, not waiting till, hey, we're going to build this thing, here it is. And then use cases. I think we did a project a few years ago about intelligent infrastructure, and it really didn't hit home to decision makers and leaders until we could provide use cases and real world examples of the services that we could deliver with intelligent infrastructure. So I would say, show more than tell. Early, bring people in early as possible, and then as many kind of use cases and stories you can tell people, and get away from the technical side of things, the better.
Robert, what would you add to that? Mark, want to hear from you as well.
So in my experience, I think dollars always talk. And so to me, the selling point in the way I explain this to, because I have a whole bunch of different groups that I report to, is yes, we're spending money now, but this is going to save us a lot of money in the long term. It allows us to build this model and then use it to try out ideas that we couldn't in any other way try out unless we actually went and did them. And if they weren't successful after we did them, then we would have spent money that is going to have to be respent later. So the digital twin really helps with letting folks, the dollars-based explanation helps. I think the other piece of this also is from a risk management perspective. Again, you can mitigate risk with doing things by saying we can try this out in our digital twin and see what it's going to look like to help us get a better understanding of, is it appropriate, is it not? I think the thing that is, and I want to be really clear about, Austin has a very active community in terms of privacy and data security. And what we're always very clear about is what I'm working on specifically, and I think in the city in general, is we're not here to look at individuals. We're here to look at the community and use these models to help the community as a whole, not to the benefit or detriment of any one individual.
Yeah, I mean, great question, Anthony. I guess I got a couple of points. One is you talked about data, and for cities, at least myself, data is only useful if it's tied to decision making. Like, what decision are we trying to make, and what data do we need to make that? It is often that sometimes professors focus on knowledge building, which is wonderful, but not really useful for us. So I constantly kind of think, like, what decision am I trying to make and will this make a difference? So that's one thing. The other thing, though, is that, more and more we're realizing that we're getting bigger. We're the 11th largest city in the United States. We have, 13,000 employees. We're making decisions all day long. But who's not there making decisions with us are the people who are most impacted by those decisions. So we're trying to say, no data without stories, no stories without data. And I say that because we still use the tools of like 10 or 20 years ago. Most of the maps we use within the city are flat, right? They're like, think about floodplains, it's a flat map. If you think about census data, it's a flat map. And when we talk to the community members, they're constantly looking at it and be like, well, there's this road, where's my house? Like they have a hard time understanding where they are within this flat map of multicolored things. And I think what this allows to do is to sort of think about, what does that space look like beyond just a flat map? Who actually lives there? What's a little bit more information about the community? And I think that helps the community, but also helps us really think a bit deeper about what's going on. So how do we communicate that? How do we work with the community? And how do we create these tools that help the community make that decision?
Love that. And Mark, I'm going to come back to you in a minute on that piece about community, given a question from Cynthia. But one quick follow-up question for the three of you. Can you clarify, were there any private sector partners that were a part of this collaboration, in addition to the city and the university? And I ask that because regular attendees at this series know that public-private partnerships have been such a common thread in what helps to enable the deployment of tech and innovation in cities. So we'd love to hear if there is any sort of private sector partnership that's a part of this work. No.
Not the projects that we're talking about right here that I know of. The city has a lot of T3s, but not any, I think, in my portfolio.
Great, that's really helpful. Yeah, Mark.
I think Charles is right. Like, this is a relationship between the city and researchers at the university. So it's really like us two brainstorming and thinking ideas that have never been thought before that aren't really happening. But I do want to say that, like, these do have links to private land, private partners to be able to participate in this. The other thing is that we do get, connected to other researchers or other private entities who have new innovative tools. And we're like, sometimes we just need somebody to test it out. And here's a platform we could test it out on. So I think there's definitely a lot of opportunities. But, the ILA is still fairly new and young, and we're still sort of building it out. And there's always opportunity to bring in partners.
That's great. Maybe we'll have you on a future session to hear how the partnership has grown and expanded. I'd love to come to Cynthia from Honolulu next. Cynthia, if you're in a place where you are able to come off mute and ask your question to our speakers, would love to invite you to do so. In case Cynthia is not able to, I'll pose her question here, which is, Cynthia's wondering how digital twins could help facilitate or ease the rebuilding stage in the aftermath of the devastating wildfires in Maui. She specifically asked, how might it ease the deep concerns of local survivors and residents? Can I invite any of you to come off mute and speak to that?
We often work in maps, and it's council and other departments are asking for vulnerability maps, and like, what are the resiliency or what are the climate impacts in the community. But I think maps can get you so far, right? And I think they can tell you where to start. They're a conversation starter, but they should never be a replacement for community engagement and true community discussions. So when I said no data without stories, no story without data, you have to go to the community, have one-on-one conversations, understand the lived experience, and then really follow up with action. You don't want them to relive trauma and then you not do anything. Like, what is it that we should be doing? How do we bring that community in to make sure that we're making the right decisions at the right place? The tools we've talked about here are great as a starter. They should never be the end, right? The decision making has to be co-collaborated with the community.
Really appreciate that. Charles, Robert, anything y'all would like to add?
I don't have anything to add to that one.
Just to kind of, on a much smaller scale, because we do have 5 different departments working in the operations floor, they all have kind of a different business mission. While we can build this really super cool model and do this great layout and design, in the end, those are the folks who are going to be living with it. And we need to make sure, as Mark says, no data without discussion and no discussion without data. We want to make sure that those folks see how it's going to be used and really have a chance to evaluate what we're proposing based on the model.
That's great. And I do think that that element of engagement and communication that Mark was speaking to sort of loops back to something Anthony mentioned at the top of our call in terms of feedback loops, right? So ensuring that this isn't just a static visualization or just some very snazzy tool that's used, but rather there's the feedback loop that allows for it to improve over time, right? So that it's just only getting better, which is great. Kara, I'd love to invite you to come off mute and ask a question.
Thanks, Tina. It's Kara from Cornell Tech. And Charles, I know we've chatted before. It's one of the reasons I wanted to ask this question. I thought it was really helpful in our work with the City of New York at Cornell Tech to hear a little bit more about how you had structured your agreement between the City of Austin and the University of Austin. So I was wondering whether you might be able to share a little bit about how you went about kickstarting the interlocal agreement for those that are just getting started.
Kara, I love that very practical question because I have a feeling that folks on the call today are wondering that exact thing.
Yeah, it started with us going to them with some kind of broad and general needs and questions, and then figuring out how we might be able to really start a conversation, a discussion, and a relationship there. Came to find out that UT and the city already do a lot of work together. So as we talked more and more about it, we realized that all this work was happening, but that it wasn't tracked or monitored in any way. It was really, everything was a one-off, ad hoc, type of relationship or project. So the conversations went from, yes, there is general interest in certain areas to work together. The city does value research is really a strategic asset, and data is a strategic asset. And then how might we then make it easier for the city to collaborate with UT and to share data? And it really needed to have some sort of legal and administrative measures and vehicles put in place. So it went from, went beyond just having a good relationship to putting that legal and administrative infrastructure in place. And it took a while to get all the right people around the room or in the same room together to normalize and standardize all of our processes and policies and things like that. But once we all agreed that it was something that something that would be beneficial to both organizations, and we had leadership from both organizations on the same page, having kind of one way to do business and staffing it accordingly, both at the city and at the university, so that we have single points of contact for anybody in either organization. We've got one way to enter contracts. We have one way to vet and evaluate opportunities. So it was really a lot about figuring out the most efficient and easy and streamlined way to do it that was clear and understandable, and then having it really treated as a living program, and not just a document that purchasing people have and then it goes away, but it's something that we foster on a weekly basis. I meet with UT on a weekly basis. We do several events during the year to get the information out about the interlocal agreement and get people involved in different projects or grant opportunities and things like that. So something like this is something that does need to be staffed and resourced and thought of as a living and breathing relationship.
I think that that likely Charles will resonate with a lot of folks, and I imagine you might have some of our attendees today reaching out.
Yeah, I can share. I can share all our documentation, interlocal agreement itself, the work orders that we use. I'm happy to share all of those things with anyone.
That's incredible. Well, and we'll try to include those in our write-up that we'll post on the Local Infrastructure Hub website. So that'll be a great, really valuable resources. I find that it's always helpful to have an example, particularly when engaging the lawyers in a city government. I'm going to ask each of our speakers one last question, but first, we want to put up our closing poll questions for the audience. The two questions are going to pop up in just a moment. The first question is, based on what you've learned today, how likely are you to pursue a digital twin project? Second question is, how likely are you to engage a university research partner? in pursuing a digital twin project. So thanks to the audience for giving your 2 cents based on your community and where you are on your journey. And while folks are answering that, I'm going to come to each of our speakers and invite each of you to share just quickly, since we're almost out of time, what is one piece of practical advice that you have for the communities on today's call who, you know, we saw 57% of folks were not even yet on the journey. They were just starting out. So I welcome each of you to share one practical piece of advice for everyone on today's call. Charles, why don't you get us started?
Yeah, since I'm the partnerships manager, I would say partnerships. Get universities, private sector, the community involved in the conversation early on. So I would say collaborate and share.
Robert, how about you?
I think the other thing I would mention, full disclosure, I'm a graduate of University of Texas at Austin. However, there's a lot of great research there that can be of direct benefit to local and state government. And I would encourage all of the participants to find a university to partner with, because there's so much that they can bring in a very cost-effective way that will really help and benefit local government operations.
Just keep it simple, because it can quickly get out of what, you know, the scope creep is pretty intense. So keep it simple. You know, digital twin is just another word for 3D model, but you know, so like get your project, keep it simple, get a project management plan, and just move forward and make it happen. And it's a lot of fun.
And that last piece is maybe the most encouraging, Mark. It's fun. And to the advice that Robert gave around reaching out to a university research partner, I saw in the poll results, 71% of you have an existing university partner that you could leverage. That's a fantastic starting point. For those of you who don't, again, we should have information up on the Local Infrastructure Hub website in the next few days with a summary of today's session and some of those resources that Charles referenced. So if you don't have an existing university research partner, don't worry. This might be the spark that catalyzes going out and finding one. I want to thank each of you, gentlemen. Thank you so much for participating in today's session. I've learned a ton, and judging from the poll results, I think our audience did as well. For those of you joining today's call, I'll share that our next Tech and Innovation Center series session will be on November 29th. Stay tuned for the topic as we finalize. And in the meantime, you can find lots of great resources on the Local Infrastructure Hub website. We'll have the recording of this webinar up there, as well as the resources I referenced. And there's a ton of other great sessions going on. So don't miss out on any of that, so that we can be, again, helping your communities deliver real results for residents. Thanks so much for joining us today. And to the gentleman in Austin, thank you so much for sharing your experience and for just bringing something as complex as a digital twin and translating that for all of us. This was fantastic. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks for having us.